hate us, and then they have to give a reason for why they hate us. It's a real thing. Like governments can actually manipulate people.
Sudanese people are known for their hospitality.
He wouldn't even allow us to leave at that moment, right? Because we're sitting down.
And you talking about this weapon. What was this weapon?
They're the ones who actually whip each other in weddings. God. The governments have always thrived on the fact that they created some sort of animosity against the rest of the world in order for them to get support from people. This Arab tribe that he basically paid was going out and killing all these other African tribes. I saw these rapes and I saw all these things that have been done by the Janjaweed against these African tribes. You're a liar, you're a this, you're that.
Probably bringing to do the dirty work that they don't want to do.
And that's exactly what they did. To not only people who haven't seen war before, to people who've actually denied the fact that these guys have done this before. This guy's an idiot. I know his family, he has something wrong with his brain. You know
I'm talking about you.
Yeah, you can make your people believe anything if you give them an enemy.
Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim, walhamdulillahi rabbil alameen, wassalatu wassalamu ala nabiyyina Muhammad wa ala alihi wa ashabihi ajma'een. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. Welcome back to another episode of the Muslimi Experience. I'm your host, Brother Boonaa Mohammed. Really excited for a very important podcast today, talking about what's going on in the world, specifically in East Africa, specifically in the beautiful land of Sudan. I'm joined by my guest today, Sheikh Imama. He's wearing imama, so he's now taking the title. Mamoun S. Hassan. We got to specify.
That's right, yes.
There's another Mamoun Hassan out there stealing all your credits.
There's another guy. He was born in Jeddah. He's British filmmaker. He just died though, by the way.
Oh, subhanAllah.
Which is really sad. And every time I make anything, commercial music video, anything else, they put his name.
That's why I specified. You are Mamoun S. Hassan.
Yeah.
Because the other Mamoun has been taking all your credits. How are you doing, Akhi?
Alhamdulillah, man. Everything is excellent. How are you doing?
Alhamdulillah. I'm good. You know, we've been just kind of talking candidly about the situation in Sudan. Yeah. You know, actually, we've been trying to do this, podcast kind of conversation for a while now. The current conflict, as it stands now, has been ongoing for a year, but you were also correcting me and telling me that it's been going on actually for many years. Yeah. So I don't know how deep we want to go, but I think we can start from the beginning. This is a long podcast. So let's talk about Sudan. Let's talk about some of the history. I'm going to be candid so everyone knows my bias, because my bias is very clear. How much I love Sudan.
Yeah.
Okay. How much I love Sudanese people, how much I love the culture. You know, it's heartbreaking for all of us to see what's going on there right now. May Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala alleviate our brothers and sisters of their pain and suffering in that region. But I think for many of us, we don't actually know the history. We don't really know what's going on. I think obviously in the midst of what's happening in Gaza, especially where that conflict is being very well broadcasted, kind of Sudan has kind of gone under the radar a little bit. So let's talk a little bit about, the history of this beautiful nation.
Yeah. So I guess one of the things that people may not know about it, I mean, living here in Canada, I remember the first time anyone asked me where I was from. He was a little white kid when I was young. And I was like, where is Sudan? And I said to him, it's in Africa. And he couldn't believe me. He was just like, there's no such countries in Sudan and Africa. And I was like, well, what countries do you know in Sudan? And he named Egypt, he named South Africa and Nigeria. Those are the only countries that exist in Sudan, right? According to him. No, he knew Ethiopia as well.
Nice.
Because
snuck by.
That's right, yeah. But that's a really funny thing, because I think Sudan, before the actual split that happened in 2005, was the largest country in Africa, right? And for the longest time, it's always been described as what they call in Sudan. They used to call it Sallat Ghiza al-Alam. So it has like the basket of the food.
The basket of civilization, right? Is
the basket of food for the world.
Yes.
So just the food that grows naturally without any sort of cultivation is enough to feed the whole world, which is really, really strange. But to me, like living here now, I actually remember living in Sudan and so on. That's so real, because food, fruits and stuff like that used to grow in our household without us actually taking care of it.
SubhanAllah.
Like my home, I used to live in Khartoum, I lived in Medani as well. Our backyard, our yard, really in a sense, we had lemon trees, we had orange trees, we had mango trees, we had orange trees. And these nobody know who grew them. Guava trees, they just grow, right? They just somebody would just eat a guava, throw the rest of it, and like within a couple of days, a couple of weeks or whatever, it'll grow. And then literally within a couple of years, it actually grown, because the homes actually come from grandparents to to parents, the kids, right? They get passed on. Like the history of your house itself is basically fruits that your grandparents have have 8 in the house, right?
Wow.
They grow, right? So it's really fertile land. Beautiful people, alhamdulillah. I mean, I'm biased as well, but like I can attest to the fact that every time I've been to anywhere, I've heard nothing negative of Sudanese people as a people, right? Like, I mean, individualistic, there's obviously issues, right? But as a people, they've always they were respectful of everybody else everywhere they've been.
By the way, Sudanese people are known for their hospitality. This is like
right.
one of the major milestones of their community. Like if you go to a Sudanese house, I know this about Sudanese people. If you compliment anything on a Sudanese person, that person all of us is gonna have to take it off.
Takes it off.
If I say, "Oh, I like this thobe," okay, khalas, then you gotta get. No, it's okay. You can have it. Right. But that's like a hallmark of like Sudanese culture, like willing to literally give you the shirt off their backs.
It's a real thing. It is so strange actually because we like. So I went to Sudan to visit Sudan not too long, long ago from now, but it was me and my brother. We were actually going to a small little village, and we don't like. There's no addresses there, so when you go to a village, you actually have to ask for the person's house. And I remember this was so weird to us because we went into this house, and as we're walking in, because this house was described to us, and we're asked for the person's home, and they're like, "Oh yeah, you have arrived." That's what the guy said. He said, "Oh, wasil tatab." This is the words he said. Wasil tatab, which you have arrived. And then we brought inside, and then we were like. They give us like juice, you get like fruits in front of you, right? And then you're sitting down, and it's a small little village, so it's not like rich people in like big towns,
right?
And then a good half an hour has passed on after tea, after ligemat, after all kinds of things. The father asked, "So who are you guys here for?" And then my brother was like, "Oh, we were here to see Uncle so and so on." We were trying to visit my grandfather, who was my grandfather's brother, and the guy's like, "Oh, he lives just down the street." But he wouldn't even allow us to leave at that moment, right? Because we were sitting down. So he goes and he sends his son, and his son goes and gets him. And absolutely no way we can leave the house. They're slaughtering sheep for us. They're like, we're being fed in a house that's like this. Imagine
this is a random house you walked
into. It was a
into.
mistake. Like we shouldn't have been there. You know what I mean? It was just literally a mistake. And I couldn't believe how things like that happen, but they happen all of the time. Everybody's seen these videos, for instance, in Ramadan, when they actually stop down the highway. They shut down the highway before iftar time. And if you're driving, like you Google it, right? Like iftar in Sudan, right? They'll shut down the streets and everybody just actually eats in the streets. And if you're driving a car, you'll get stopped. Doesn't matter if you're in a hurry. Doesn't matter if you're carrying janaza with you. You shut down, you'll sit down and you eat. And then when you're done, when they're satisfied with their own hospitality towards you, then you can go and you can actually leave. So it's like real nice people, honestly. That's the thing about it. But it's also contrasted with something that I just actually read not too long ago about Sudan itself, which is and my Sudanese brothers are not going to like this very much, but it's the truth, right? It's that the oldest weapon in the world, like primitive weapon, was actually found in Sudan. And I actually researched this because I was like, why is there so many wars in Sudan, even though people are so nice, right? And like Sudan has been in a state of war since like the 50s, right? Like even before that, when the British people were colonizing us, we were fighting the British. Before the British, we were fighting the Turks. Before the Turks, we were fighting. Like there was always a war going on, right? Ever since the war itself has left, since the colonization has left, we've been also in a war, a state of war that's continuous between the North and the South. Generally, right? It'd stop a year or two and then it'll start again. And then when that stopped, there was a war in Darfur. And when that stopped, there was some fighting and clashing that happened in the East. So as much as hospitable people they are, there has just always been ongoing conflicts and clashes happening in Sudan for a long, long time, for as long as I actually remember.
And what do you attribute that to? I mean, because obviously, and you're talking about this weapon. What was this weapon?
I don't know what it was.
It's a stick, bro. Come on, what is the oldest weapon? What could it have been?
I mean,
bow and arrow?
I'm honestly thinking it was probably like a knife that was actually
it was probably like carved out or something.
Yeah, like carved out to actually.
Fair enough. Yeah,
but it also shows me, like, I mean, I don't want to say this, so these people are like.
You think they're like war people?
Yeah, I mean, so I come from a tribe that's called Ja'aliya, right? Like if you actually Google Ja'aliya, they're the ones who actually whip each other in weddings. God. In weddings, like when you're having a party and stuff like that, this is how you actually celebrate. By the groom, he gets this like, it's made out of a tail of an animal of some sort, right? And they whip you with it, and he cuts the skin, right? But then the brave ones are the ones who don't even flinch. Like you get whipped and you don't even move, and you're like, yes, that's the guy, right? And then also, you look at the the dances of people in the East, for instance. These are dances that are, for instance, are war dances, right? They're all war dances, right? And again, I don't want to just like single out Sudan as a place of war all the time, but this bravery, this sense of manhood, this sense of strength, and this sense of no one can tell us what to do, and all these things, it attributes to a lot of the conflict that's actually happening. There's not enough room for politics in our country, unfortunately, right? Like there's not enough room for.
Well, I would extend it to a lot of Africa, by the way. I don't think it's a unique Sudanese issue. I think a lot of times, you know, especially first world countries, developing countries that are coming out of colonialism, they're coming with a lot of that baggage, right? And a lot of times, by the way, these tribal wars, you know, have been almost manufactured for us. These lines in the sand where you are now this, because back in the day we all lived together, and we all shared the land. We're all, you know. But let's now, if we chime in specifically on the current conflict, who is fighting? Because this is, I think, where a lot of people kind of lose track. Because, like I said, in Gaza, it's very simple. Okay, you know, you have this group, you have that group. We know which side we're on. We know the lines are very clear. The history. But in Sudan, it's a little bit convoluted because we don't really know who's fighting who.
Okay, so it's actually really strange because in Sudan, even those who are actually in Sudan don't really know. I mean, we know the names of who's fighting who, but we don't really know because of what and all these kinds of reasons, right? And it seems to us like it's such a problem. Like, I'll explain something to you before we even get into this war itself, right? We have a group called the RSF, right? The Rapid Support Forces, RSF, and then you have the actual Sudanese armed forces, SAF. That's what they call it.
So they're like the government.
Yeah. So you have an army and you have a militia. Okay. But this militia itself, this RSF, was actually created by the army as well. Yeah, so that's what I'm saying to you. So that's why it's such a weird thing. They actually say this. We've been saying this. We've been saying there was literally no reason for the RSF to actually be born as an actual entity on its own. The reason why it was created is, if you remember, this 2004. This is the only time anybody would have heard about Sudan, when George Clooney and Amal Clooney were all about Darfur and Sudan and so on, right? So this was a real issue that was happening at that time, where the Darfur region, there was a group that was fighting the armed forces. Now, the armed forces were already in a war in the south of Sudan, right? So they didn't really have any means of actually being able to spread themselves thin and go. So what they did is they actually basically created these. At that time, we used to call them the Janjaweed. They weren't actually organized. They were just mercenaries, right? They were
hired guns.
Yeah, they were just basically hired guns. The problem that what they did with it, though, is that they allowed them to actually also extract the land for resources so they can pay themselves. So they gave them mountains of gold. So Sudan is really, 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 really rich in gold, especially in the west region of it. So these guys will tell them, okay, well, you can have this mountain. This mountain is full of gold, right? And then the RSF, basically, this Janjaweed people, they became an actual army, a real proper army. And not only did they allow them to become an army, they actually also allowed them to deal with other countries as well. So for a long, long time, for instance, in the Asifat al-Hazm, Saudi Arabia, when they were trying to fight Yemen, for instance, the RSF was actually fighting on the side of Saudi Arabia, even though Sudan, the armed forces were there as well, but the actual hired guns, the actual fighting, what we call like the army, the people on their feet, you know, like fighting, were the RSF.
So they're contracted mercenaries.
Basically, okay. Right? And I mean, even there's actually even reports right now from the European Union when they're also paying them so they can control that whole western part of Sudan, so people who are actually fleeing Africa don't reach Europe. So it's such a weird thing because you guys are getting paid from so many different places, but they're not an actual organization. They're not actually an institution of Sudan in any way, right? So and they, for a long time, they were called the Janjaweed, right?
Is that like a derogatory term?
Janjaweed is basically a word that's called like a jinn on horses. Because that's what they were at the beginning.
Jinn on horses?
Yeah, so that's what they were at the beginning. Yeah.
So hold on, this is an army of ghost riders we talking about?
So you also, I wanted to go back to, like, it's such a complex thing, right? The person that they hired, which is this Himeti guy, right? As a person himself, he just basically kept on hiring people from his tribe.
Okay.
Right, which makes it really, really bad, right?
Very African.
Yeah, and I mean, that's the people he trusted. Those are people whom he's actually, and his family and so on. But they are an Arab tribe in the western part of Sudan, and there's not that many of them, right? The vast majority of tribes in the western Sudan, they're African tribes, right? So right now, for instance, when the actual attack them, but what it is, they attack African tribes. They're Arabs who attract African tribes.
So let's differentiate now. How do you define African versus Arab? Because they all look the same. If
They
you're
all
being
look the
honest.
same. So to me, if you don't have, so there's tribes that we know for a fact have different languages, have local languages. That's what we describe as African tribes.
I've heard like the asl of that also is that if your native African tongue has been removed and you only speak Arabic,
Yeah.
you are Arab.
Yeah. But these guys actually have traces of being Arabs, right? I mean, obviously they intermarried into other tribes, but they
Sure.
don't have another language. But it's not like they had a native language and it was taken from them.
Sure.
So I come from a tribe, this Ja'aliya, for instance. We never had a different language. We were always, Ja'aliya was always known as people who spoke Arabic since the day they arrived in Sudan. I mean, my mother, for instance, and father and so on, they'll trade their ancestry back to Al-Abbas, the uncle of the Prophet Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam, right? So they actually say we're real Arabs. That's what they say.
Sure.
But I don't look very Arab. So I know for a fact there's a couple of Africans, grandmothers within the actual tribe itself. My grandparents are quite dark in terms of the actual.
But also,
really
I
the skin color.
I feel like lineage at that time, especially, I know it's a little bit of a tangent,
Yeah.
but like it wasn't really like color related, right? Like
Yeah.
there are black Arabs,
Yeah.
like
Yeah.
skin tone and these things as we see them are very subjective today,
Yeah.
but like that wasn't the case back then. Like,
yeah, but you can differentiate between an African dark skin versus an Arab dark skin. You can still see it in Sudan, right?
sure, some of the facial features.
Yeah, the
and-
facial features, the hair texture is really the big thing
Right.
in how it is, right? And Sudan is just really a strange country. Like it's a country that has 600, 700 tribes, right? Or tribes and sub-tribes, right?
very diverse.
Many of them who think that they're Arab, some of them think they're Arab, some of them don't think Arab, and they don't have a geographical location either, which is really, really weird, right? Like you'd assume that because Arabs come from the north, that the Arab tribes would be in the north. But my wife comes from the Nubian tribe, they're not Arabs. They just say we're not Arabs. They're Mahas, Donagla, Halfawiyin, and these guys who are in the north. They actually have a distinct language that they speak until today. Those are actually the ones who fenced off the Muslims. Remember this story that I was telling you about when the Muslims wanted to actually attack Sudan and spread Islam to the south. These Rumat al-Hidaq, right? They used to call them. These are the ones who actually they were so good at throwing bow and arrows,
archers.
that they would hit the Muslims right in the eyes. They say, "Okay, which eye do you want, right or left?" That's what they would say, and they would hit them, and then they would stop. And then at that time, the companions of the Prophet said, "Okay, we can't fight these guys. Let's come up with some sort of truce." And then they allowed for the truce itself. Basically, allowed for Muslims to just pass through. They said, "Okay, you can call da'wah, but you cannot invade. It's not an invasion. We'll allow you to come in." And they allowed them to actually build a masjid there. And they were able to actually spread Islam to southern part of Sudan more than the northern part. That's why the northern part of Sudan right now, there's a lot of people who are actually Christians.
In the northern part?
Yeah, in the northern part, in the very far northern part of Sudan, there's a lot of Christians.
Is that like Nubia, the tip
yeah,
of
like
Egypt?
the Nubia, yeah, like the Nubians, the people who are south of
Egypt,
Aswan,
right?
Wadi Halfa, and these places. There's a lot of Christians who still live there, right? But basically, Islam entered Sudan from the north. It passed, and then it came back from the south of Sudan, heading back to the north, and that's kind of how it spread all out. So the tribes themselves are really weird, right? Some tribes are just half and half, Christians and Muslims, and some of them are not. Some of them, I mean, right now, so for instance, the northern part of Sudan is, people say 95% of them are Muslims, right? But we have also Coptics who live in Sudan who've come. We have actually like Greeks who live in Sudan. This is really, really weird. Yeah.
But then also when you go to the south,
yeah,
right? Like the Jubba area, they almost don't look anything like what you would assume the northern, or Arabicized Sudanese look like.
So this is actually really important. You mentioned this up, right? So you spoke about Juba city, for instance. So southern part of Sudan, there was an actual line that the British people would not allow. Even though Sudan was one country, they wouldn't allow people from the south to come up to the north, and they wouldn't allow for people from the north to go down to the south. That's because they actually wanted to spread Christianity in the bottom part of Sudan. That's how literally Christianity was actually spread down there. And they just wouldn't allow, they wouldn't build any infrastructure, so you can actually, and until today, this huge country, right? There's no direct line from Sudan to Juba. There's just through an open way. You actually have to, for a long time, you actually have to get onto boats and then get off the boats and go into trucks, and from the trucks, and that's all.
Even though they're connected by
they're
land.
one country. They're literally one country, but they just wouldn't allow for that to happen because, they don't want to do that. And also,
Right.
what they did is something really weird. They educated the people in the north, and they wouldn't allow for people in the south to actually get the same type of education.
Even though they were Christian in the South.
Yeah, I mean, they were Christianizing them.
Right.
They were still kind of like calling them to Christianity, right?
Okay.
And then America came in the play of it, right? And then what they started to do, and this is in the 70s and the 80s, right? They started to actually educate people in the south of Sudan. So now you have this dichotomy in Sudan where like the elites from the south of Sudan, they were all educated in the U.S. So John Garang, for instance, has his PhD. This is the big rebel who passed away, unfortunately, in 2005. Everybody was really hopeful that he was going to make some changes, right? He has his PhD from the University of Iowa. So many of the presidents and vice presidents right now who are actually ruling the South of Sudan, they did their PhDs in the U.S. because the U.S. were just kind of supporting that. While so many of those who are in the North are British educated. So you see how it's such a weird, so like literally two different countries who are supposedly allies, but they were working.
They have their own agendas.
Yeah, everybody has their own agendas in that
Sure.
country itself. Right?
Also, we should mention that like even the north of Sudan, very educated people. SubhanAllah. I had the pleasure, literally one of the probably the best shows I ever had in my life. I performed in Khartoum many years ago. And funny enough, you know who performed with me? I think you know this. Mustafa the poet was there.
Yeah.
He just happened to be in Sudan at the time.
Yeah.
I remember kind of bringing him out but like I was brought down by a medical school. It was like a medical university.
Yeah.
And I think they were being taught in English as well. Like I was kind of confused as like, I want to be a language barrier. They're like, no, we all speak English.
Yeah.
So I was shocked to even find out like the amount of educated people, the amount of universities, the amount of doctors. And till this day, we know, mashallah, there's big Sudanese community. Wherever there's big Sudanese communities, there's lots of doctors, lots of engineers. So mashallah, education is very well emphasized.
Yeah, so education is really important. Like, so and this is how Sudan itself is actually known within the Arab
very
world.
educated
right?
people, yeah.
So a lot of I taught in Saudi Arabia. When I used to teach in Saudi Arabia, for instance, one of the things that I used to always get respect for is the fact that every one of my students, and even the teachers, the professors I used to teach with, they had teachers and professors who are Sudanese. They would say, we don't have anybody else, but Sudanese people are like math teachers or science teachers. Not science. They were always math, Arabic, and accounting. Those are the Sudanese thing and Arabic language, right? So these are the major things. But University of Khartoum, for instance, is a really, really old university. When you look at the Middle East education system, for instance, University of Khartoum is one of the oldest one. King Fahad.
Yeah.
If you know him, King Fahad, like the guy who's ruled Saudi Arabia for such a long time. He's a graduate of University of Khartoum.
Really?
He
studied in Khartoum.
Yeah.
Ajib, I didn't know that.
Yeah, and like it was a place to go. I mean, when I used to live there in 2004, 2005, there was a lot of Arabs who actually came and studied in the University of Khartoum.
And also the Arabic of the Sudanese, like mashallah tabarakallah. I mean, not the Amaya, not like the one they speak on the streets, but like they're very good in Arabic. Like
so Sudanese people have also lived abroad for a long time, right? So they're able to comprehend a lot of dialects from a lot of Arabs, right? We always complain to Sudanese people. We say we understand every single Arab dialect, but nobody understands. Nobody knows what we're saying. I mean, these things are changing, and I think it was also a point of pride for us at the fact that we're able to kind of get along with everybody as well, right? When we lived in Egypt, we were really happy. When we lived in Saudi Arabia, we were really, really happy and comfortable. Also, these people were never. This is a thing that people need to know about. Until the 1990s, Sudanese people never left Sudan as immigrants. They always went out as expats. We're going to go work. We're going to go work. Help out whatever we're going to go for, and then we're going to come back and live for the rest of our lives. So this whole idea of immigration, going to live abroad, didn't actually happen. And so there isn't a huge like export of culture that you're seeing. So a lot of people right now, for instance, when we talk about the war in Sudan, and people say to me, well, how come there's so much attention on other fights and wars and so on? I always say to them, I said, we just, as a community, a Sudanese community, we haven't been out of our country for that long of a time.
There's not much advocacy outside of Sudan. Like everyone is still in Sudan.
Exactly. Yeah. So I mean, a lot of us, but now, and then the community that lives abroad is very young. We still are not that organized in that sense. And not only are we young in terms of age, we're also maturity-wise. We haven't had big problems in our country for the long of a time, so we can actually come up with some sort of advocacy and some sort of work and organization, like, for instance, the Palestinian brothers have, for instance, or like the Pakistani brothers have had, for instance, because they've been out of their countries for years.
But there's also been like, I'm confused by that because there's also been like an embargo on Sudan for so many years.
Yeah.
Like it's like like the US dollar I know is like illegal, or like, you know, even when I was in Sudan, like trying to get money and stuff, like it was very challenging. Like there's
Yeah. So Sudan has always been a country that actually thrived. Like the governments, actually, I don't want to say Sudan. The governments that have always thrived on the fact that they created some sort of animosity against the rest of the world in order for them to get support from the people. This is a really dirty way of working politics, right? So Omar al-Bashir, this guy who's ruled Sudan for 30 years, with an iron fist, really, in a sense. He wasn't his big rallying cry was, you know, down USA, right? Like down with the US, and they always and this is, I think it's funny because they've always stood on the wrong side of history everywhere, right? So during the Iraqi war, for instance, they were one of the few countries that stood with Iraq. You know what I mean?
Who?
Sudan.
Okay.
Yeah, which is the aggressor at that time, right?
So funny. Just picking the random sides of the fight.
Yeah,
Okay.
all the time. When everybody kicked out Osama bin Laden, for instance,
They
gave him a home.
he came there,
Yeah, they gave him a home in Sudan, and not only they give him a home, they give him a wife, they give him like lands, right? Like they give him everything else that he wanted.
Damn.
So they just kind of always played on this anti-West sentiment to rally the people, and that basically just brought a lot of embargoes against them, like just one after one after one after one. And, you know, at the expense of the Sudanese people, unfortunately, right? Like Sudanese people, until today, I always say that nobody, as Sudanese people, nobody actually has like an like Western agenda in a sense, like that. Like nobody hates America as a country, right? You know what I mean?
Yeah, because you don't really see like American flag burning and stuff like that. Like it's not,
Well, we don't know them. We don't really care for them,
Sure.
right? As a whole, right? But it's just been something that's been given to us. And then when the order of arrest for Omar al-Bashir came about, because of the Darfur issue, by the way, because at that time, this Arab tribe that he basically paid was going out and killing all these other African tribes.
This was in Darfur.
Yeah, in Darfur, for instance. And it was a call for a genocide. And even though at that time we didn't actually believe it, like even as Sudanese people, we didn't actually believe this would happen because we'd never seen such a thing, right? I'll tell you a story. I remember at Brock University, this was in 2006, 2007, there was this lady who came, American lady who came, and she gave this lecture about Sudan, and she said, oh, I was in Darfur and I saw these rapes and I saw all these things that have been done by the Janjaweed against these African tribes. And I was like, at that time, because Sudanese people don't do that. That's what we've been taught. Sudanese people don't. I stood up and said, "You're a liar. You're a this. You're that. You're this." And I called her out, and she was so quiet about it. And at the end, after I finished with my rant, she said to me, "You know, the truth will come out one day. These people whom you're supporting are just not good people. You just don't know them. They're not good people. They're just not good people, and you're not gonna believe it because you don't want to believe that your people are capable of doing that." But she said, "Human beings are capable of doing the most evil things that you can think of." And this is really sad because at that time I left, I was so livid, bro. Yeah, I just wanted to kill this lady. I was so angry with her. And right now, 2019, for instance, when the revolution happens, this is the same group that did all of these atrocities in 2004 in Darfur. They're the same ones who are doing it now in Khartoum. But now in Khartoum, I actually have video proof. Like literally, we're actually seeing the raping that's happened, the way that they were being so, just my family members, my cousins, everything who are seeing it, they're like, listen, these people are not human beings. We don't understand where these people came from.
So it's the same people, this rapid...
the rapid support services.
Okay.
Rapid support forces.
Right. So RSF,
RSF
they were the ones who at that time were being sent
called,
to Darfur.
Yeah, they were called Janjaweed. They've always been from Darfur,
okay.
right? They were called the Janjaweed at that time. But then after a little bit of time, what they did is they basically said, okay, fine, you did such a good job. We'll just make you as
rebranded.
We rebranded you as a separate, but also kind of work alongside the armed forces.
So arm's length mercenaries that they can also probably bring in to do the dirty work that they don't want to do.
And that's exactly what they did. They actually bought up for the dirty work. So in 2019, when the revolution was happening, Omar al-Bashir himself, and I remember this in actually one of the sayings, he said, "Oh, you guys don't know. We can bring the RSFs here, and they'll clear out all of this things that are happening in the street." That's when the actual revolution was literally happening. People were out in the streets. It's just craziness, right? And people laughed. They said, "Oh, you're scaring us with them." And then he called them. But when they came to Khartoum, these guys are far away. Like the western part of Sudan is really, really far. Like that's one of the things that people have to understand about
geography of it. It's
yeah,
massive,
it's really, really far away, right? Like imagine it's easier for people in the western part of Sudan to go and actually study in Chad in a different country than to come study in Khartoum. Cheaper, easier, all kinds of things to go and study in a different country than to come to the capital of your own country. Like that's how far they are from us culturally as well, right? So when these guys came to Khartoum, they didn't look like us. All of us as Sudanese people, we thought these are not Sudanese people. Until today, I hear this. RSFs are not Sudanese people. They're Sudanese people. They're just from a place because they themselves have been treated so badly for so long of a time. They also feel like they've been pushed out of the country and that they have no power of it. But now when they came to Khartoum, they used the same tactics that they were using in the western part, in Darfur and so on in 2004, 2005, right? Before all of these times. But now they were doing it in the capital to people who've never seen war before. To not only people who haven't seen war before, to people who've actually denied the fact that these guys have done this before. We used to say there's no way we're handing over our president because there's no way Sudanese people will do such a thing. But now they came and did it in Khartoum, right? So I know that the beginning of the story was about like Omar al-Bashir, right? But when the arrest came out for him, right? And I was there in Sudan at that time. And I remember being a westernized kid that I am. I was having a discussion. I was literally eating in the street. Like, you know how in Sudan you eat in the street and you just order food from like a lady who's just cooking in the under any sort of tree. And I was just sitting eating there, and then they were talking about, oh yeah, and I remember the prosecutor's name was Okambo. So they were saying, oh, Okambo wants to get our president. Let him come down here. We'll show him, how we'll deal with him. And I just, I'm the kid who came from Canada. Like, I said, if Omar al-Bashir is really innocent, why doesn't he just go and defend himself in the court? And the guy just took out a knife. Wallahi, no, wallahi. And he just stood up like, Inta khain? Like this whole idea, like, like, what are you, a traitor? And I was like, no, I'm not. And then the lady who I go and eat with her every single day, she's like, no. This guy's an idiot. I know his family. He has something wrong with his brain.
I'm talking about you.
Yeah, he came from Canada. He doesn't know what he's talking about.
He's clearly a Canadian idiot. Yeah.
She's like, take your food, leave. She's the one who actually broke it up. But it was really at that time when I actually genuinely realized the fact that you can make your people believe anything if you give them an enemy. Just give them just an enemy, right? As an actual like leader, say, oh, these guys hate us, these guys do this, and it doesn't help. But the fact that the embargo actually hurt the people as well. It was harmful to them. It was supposed to punish a political. And you know what embargoes are supposed to do, right? They're supposed to basically
put pressure on the government so that they change up.
It's supposed to put pressure on the people so they can change the government.
Wow.
But that doesn't happen because it's failed every single time.
It gives the people more reason to hate you.
And therefore they
support the government.
And the rhetoric gets even stronger and stronger. Oh, you see what they're doing to you. You see how they're punishing us. That's because they hate us, and then they have to give a reason for why they hate us. Oh, they hate us because we're such good Muslims.
It's funny. I mean, not funny. SubhanAllah. I hear a lot of like similarities with even Palestine.
Yeah,
and the way in which the state of Israel has basically lied to their people. Right, manufacturing consent to make them feel like, okay, this is our enemy. Look what they've done, and it's the very same rhetoric. It's like
it's a real thing. Like governments can actually manipulate people into believing so many things. The reason why I actually don't buy that from the Israelis, okay, because Israel is actually open country.
In what sense?
In a sense that almost 90% of Israelis have a second citizenship.
Right, they've lived abroad. Yeah.
They've lived abroad. So no, I'm not gonna buy that lie from them. Right, the fact that
they're ignorant.
We don't believe.
Yeah, I don't believe it either.
Right? I differentiate it by saying in Sudan, for instance, there's some of them who don't know. I'll be honest with you. When I visited Palestine, for instance, last time, I actually had some conversation with some Israelis, and in reality, they actually do believe the rhetoric that they've been told, like this is our land and we tried to share it with the Palestinians. They said, no, we will never share it with you. It's either you or us, and therefore it has to be us. So that's the narrative that's been spread there, right? In through the Israelis and in the schools and so on, right? So they're telling us we want to share it with them. That's why the Arabs of 48 are still here. That's why we've given them citizenship. But that's a lie. I mean, they've been driven for such a long time. But then you can change history. But the reality is in Sudan, when you look at it, nobody in Sudan at that time, there was you couldn't have access to Google. You couldn't have access to there's you can't actually find information about what really America is saying about you. And also the language barrier, right?
Sure,
Sudanese people, we speak Arabic, right? And at that time when the West is telling us, no, we don't actually hate the Sudanese people. We don't know these things. For all we know is just we believe the guy who's in the radio telling us, no, they hate you. No, they dislike you. Look at what they're saying about our president, right? And how they're attacking our symbols of qawmiya, right? Our symbols of nationality in a sense. So that's kind of how things worked out. And also the oppressive regime itself, right? I've told you the history of my father before, and I don't know if you even want to mention this, but we actually left Sudan as refugees when this government, the government that just left in 2000, the one that literally ruled from 1989 all the way to 2019, that's 30 years of rules, right? The first year these guys came about, for instance, they were able to fire anybody who's loud, anybody who speaks out against them and so on. And one of those people was my father. My father was jailed for a good close to a year when we didn't really know where he was for about 6 months of that, right? And he had to sneak out of the country. He has to, literally sneak out of the country, right? In a sense, to go from Sudan to Egypt, from Egypt to fly out. And all of that because luckily enough, one of the people who was jailed with him wrote a book about the people whom he saw in jail, and he wrote his name in it. And Amnesty International in Canada, for instance, got a hold of that book, and they said, okay, these people, we got to get them out because they're in jail. They've been jailed indefinitely, so we have to find a way out for them. So that was just enough documentation for him to be able to come to Canada.
Wow.
Right? And then he brought us over here. So there was so many different things that were happening at that time, right? And even us leaving Sudan, fleeing out of Sudan, right? I'll tell you, this whole year when my father was in jail, for instance, what was being said about me and my brother and my family and my mother and so on, right? Like just our neighbors, because you can't really speak out against the government. But what you do is oh, their father is a thief. That's why he's in jail. And then when I say to them, no, it's political. Nobody gets jailed for politics here. Look at all of our parents. We're all happy. We're all good, right? So there's so many different layers to how you can oppress a people, you know what I mean, to it, and then still believe in the fact that people are good. When I went back to Sudan in 2003, 2004, I loved it. Even though the government was terrible, oppressive, all kinds of things, but I genuinely just enjoyed being amongst my people. I didn't want to talk politics so much because I just wanted to not get into it. Plus, I knew people. You know what I mean? If you know people in Sudan, that's as in any country in the world. If you know people, you get what you want. You go to the nicest places, you eat at the nicest restaurants. You get the best jobs and all kinds of things, right?
So let's go back to now the kind of overview of this conflict, right?
Yeah.
So you kind of set the stage a little bit, talking a little bit of the history, a little bit about how we got to where we are now. So now this RSF group is fighting with the current government or the regime in power.
So check it out. So when this RSF group was called to Khartoum to actually break out the revolution, what they did instead is that they came up with a coalition with the armed forces,
the army.
Yeah, and they ousted the president, who made the both of them.
That's hilarious.
Yeah, because they said basically these people are just hating him as a person, right? They didn't understand that the people actually hated the system as a whole. That's what the whole thing. But the people were also fooled. I believe that the people were also fooled, right? They thought that, okay, the president is gone. Okay, we can now deal with anybody else. But the president has had control over the army for 30 years. So everybody else who's also below him was literally installed by him, right? So at first they had
tribes?
No, so the army is different, and that's why people actually believe in the army. Even though the army is corrupt right now, people believe in the army a lot better than the RSF. The army is still an institution, right? It's still an institution. You cannot be denied entry to it based on your tribe. You'll still be promoted based on your loyalty to the army itself, not based because it's an institution. It's been ongoing for years, right? The RSF is just literally born in 2004. This is an army that's been ongoing since the 50s. It's an army that has traditions, has culture.
So there's layers of bureaucracy within it. There's infrastructure.
Yeah. So we don't like the army, but we trust it more than the RSF.
More legit,
Yeah. To us, more change can happen through them than the actual RSF itself because the RSF doesn't even have a constitution to follow.
Right.
And so they basically rallied together and they kicked out the person. And then they selected a person after him who was at that time the head of the army itself. But the people said, absolutely not. That's not the guy we want. And that was the shortest, we call him the shortest president of Sudan ever. He lasted for less than 24 hours. He himself immediately said, fine, I'm not going to do it.
Wow.
I can't control it. People won't go home anyways. And then they brought him back down to this Burhan guy. Burhan guy is the guy who's now the de facto president of Sudan. And he was the third person in charge at that time. And he said, fine, you know what? I'll rule for 2 years and then hand over this to a legitimate civilians government, right? But he couldn't do that because, honestly, so many different reasons. Like, if I want to analyze it politically, it's because he had too much to lose. This is the kind of guy who also would have gotten in trouble if the civilian government would have came over. One of the promises that the civilian government was supposed to make to the people themselves is that every single person who was involved in the previous government has to be held accountable for all the money they have stolen, for every single person they have killed, for every single person they have fired. Even I remember, even like my father and everybody else, they were so excited about the fact that fine, they're gonna get their due rights, because they had people. Yeah, they had people who actually used to just target them as a person. Like, my dad actually knows the person who targeted him specifically to get him fired, to get him fired, and to get him jailed, and he knows his name. You know what I mean? And everybody has that kind of name. So we want them held accountable, and those who were fired with no reason, no pension, I think we want our payback. We want all of these things. All these things we want, right? And the army that's been there for 30 years, like, you better believe that those who are on the top are going to be complicit. So he couldn't actually, in reality, hand over. So he basically kind of delayed this, and he kept delaying it, and just kind of kicking the can down. You know what I mean? I said, okay, fine, we'll bring another prime minister, and I'll bring another prime minister. The other thing that happened is that the RSF, the leader, Hemeti, this other guy now, he was also really powerful. Very, very powerful. He's been fighting this war in Saudi Arabia, getting paid crazy money. He's been getting a lot of support from the UAE. He's been getting a lot of support from the Wagner group. This is the thing, like, the Russian Wagner group was also giving him training. So he was really, really good at fighting in cities, at fighting within, like, smaller, like what we call like street wars. Street wars, right? And he had hopes of being a president. He just basically wanted to be a president. He thought, and at first I think he was doing actually a really good job politically. He was actually speaking to people's language. He was a better communicator than Burhan, without any doubt, right? But Burhan had a higher rank than him. And one of the conditions that the Sudanese people actually wanted there is that the army has to leave the capital city. Like, we don't want to be in a war anymore.
The army or the RSF?
The army as a whole.
Okay.
We said armies are not trained, they're not meant, they're not supposed to be rulers, they're not legislators. That's just not what they are.
It's not like a civilian police force or something like that.
We don't want any army to be in the capital city, they said. And one of the things that they said, used to say this, right? Like armies are supposed to be to protect us. Right. Go protect us. Like, you know what I mean? You shouldn't be here in the capital city, right? And that was the first one. The second thing is that let's amalgamate these. We can't have multiple armies in one country. There's going to be a war soon. That's what they were saying, right? Okay, so the timeline of how this amalgamation is going to happen, they had to come to an agreement on. Hemeti wanted 10 years
to amalgamate the armies.
Yeah.
Okay.
That's
a long
leader,
time.
That's the leader of the RSF.
Okay.
That's because he had businesses that he had to deal with. Again,
Sure.
he had also hopes of, he had to finish his work in Darfur, get all that gold out. He had to also find a way not to be, I think, because he would have been the first one to go to jail for genocide.
Genocide.
For sure. And Burhan said no, 2 years. And this back and forth happened at a time when things were really, really bad. People who were supporters of the previous government, in a sense, right? The government that was just removed in December, for instance, they started to kind of play on both ends. And unfortunately, and this is the 15th of April of 2023, basically, somebody, a third party, attacked those two parties at the same time, and making it seem like it was the other party. Now, everybody in the world knows it was a third party. Even the two parties know it's a third party. The two parties that are fighting, the RSF and the Sudanese armed forces as well, they know it was a third party because it caught them both off by like you just they could not, it could not have been anybody else, right? To the point where, this is so funny, like the actual general inspector of the armed forces, this is the second guy in command, he was driving to his office when the actual hit happened. Now, this is the guy who would have known, should have known if there is any sort of attack that was to happen, right? And he didn't know. And he was arrested literally on the street like a weirdo, you know. So this, it shows everybody that this was a third party. But once the fighting started,
doesn't matter.
You couldn't shut it. You couldn't shut it down. You could not shut it down. And
okay,
now,
who was the third party?
the third party. So everybody's in agreement that it was probably a faction of the Muslimin, a faction of the previous government that was actually overtaken in 2019. So people who liked Omar al-Bashir, basically, because there was a lot of group of people that.
So, but the Ikhwan, like in Sudan.
Yeah.
I see.
Yeah, so the Muslimin in Sudan, they're not the same as the Muslimin in Gaza or Muslimin in Egypt, right? They're Muslimin in Sudan, what they call it Kazan. They call them Kazan. I don't know if you know.
I don't know what that means.
Koz is basically like a cup that's made out of metal.
Okay.
That we use in Sudan to drink from, like a zir.
Okay.
Sure if you've been to Sudan, you've drank from one of those cups.
You talking about the community cup that everyone leaves around?
Everybody drinks. Yeah.
Okay.
So that's what they are.
I think that's how COVID started. I think
probably. Probably, very likely. But Muslim, that's what they call the cult Kazan, right?
That's so interesting.
Because they say we are Kazan and Islam is the sea from which we drink.
Allah
so it's a
very,
comedy show.
very
It's
beautiful, flowery.
Yeah, honestly, just an ongoing comedy show.
Okay, so
these that's kind of the work.
So now the government and the RSF have both been struck by this third party that they didn't know at the time. So this kind of further inflamed the entire situation. Exactly. So now they're in full-on war.
Absolutely. But the rhetoric itself really inflamed very quickly, right? Like they could have actually, everybody was saying, hey, we can calm down. We can just shut this down within an hour or two, right? Everybody was saying this could, because it's happened before where the RSF have fired on the SAF, right? The Sudanese armed forces. And it's happened where the SAF forces have fired on RSF. But these things get shut down within hours, right? Imagine this, they're literally a part of one army, but the two different factions who are just sometimes don't like each other. First of all, the RSF are very undisciplined. They're not really an army. They're just
militia.
They don't listen to anybody, right? They do whatever they actually want. And the SAF look down upon them because they get paid better than them. Right, because they're getting Emirati money. I don't know if you guys want to cut this out or not.
No, we'll keep it in. I mean, that's facts.
Please cut it out.
Who gets paid more, the RSF or the SA?
Yeah, the RSF.
Oh, because their money's coming from abroad. And they all have mountains of gold that they're digging in from.
Mountains of gold, exactly.
Sure.
So if you look at even the way that they're actually dressed, like Sudanese armed forces, they're like in like sandals. They're in like, this is a markub, by the way. I don't know if you guys have seen this.
Sudanese shoe.
This is real leather. This is real cow leather. I actually killed this cow before I wore it.
Mashallah.
Just kidding. But the RSF are actually wearing like Russian-made boots, proper clothing, proper like gear. You know what I mean? They're fully geared out. So this is kind of how things have happened, and everybody thought that it was going to get shut down within an hour or two, and then the rhetoric got inflamed. Right? We said, oh, okay. Before the leaders would never get into it and be like, oh, they would always say, oh, it's just a small faction, you know, we're going to discipline them. Oh, it was just this, but then all of a sudden it became, no, Hemeti is a traitor, and then the other Hemeti guy says, oh, Burhan is in the basement hiding, and and once that happens, if you've seen a Sudanese person, when you call them names, there's no going back. There's just no going back.
Somebody's got to die.
You got a war. Yeah,
somebody has to be killed.
War,
unfortunately. Wow.
Yeah. And then the war started, and then the army. Everybody actually believed the army was going to win because the army is way more powerful than the RSF, even though they get paid less. But they're just much more powerful.
And don't they have like more like tanks and more?
They have
like
planes. They have tanks. They have drones. They have all kinds of things. Right. It's an actual proper army. But it has never warred or went to war in a city before. And that's the thing. The RSF, that's their battleground. They know exactly how to go in homes. They know exactly how to, because that's what they've been doing all their lives, right? They're just, they just go into home from home, and then they basically occupy the actual city itself. The army itself said, go out, leave the city. We can destroy these guys in a minute or so on. And they kept saying this, give us 3 days. But the army doesn't have the small weaponry that they can actually fight within a small city. Right? So the RSF basically are able to, like, everybody says we control Khartoum. Everybody says we control Khartoum. Both of them are in Khartoum, and both of them are saying we're controlling Khartoum. And it was true because the army won't let anyone in or out of Khartoum, right? And the RSF won't allow anybody to travel within Khartoum. So both of them are actually really, in a sense, controlling the actual capital city itself. And that's honestly where the people themselves actually just start struggling, right? Where everybody is just living this fight. Every single Sudanese person hates both parties that are fighting. Like, I don't know anybody who's on either side. If there's any sort of support right now, people actually want the army to win because, again, there is a hope that the army
There's stability.
the army itself, you may be able to fix it. It's an institution, again. It has laws and rules that have been in places for years, right? That you can actually, and those people are actually, they swore, I guess, to the Constitution, right? While the RSF doesn't have that. The RSF just basically, it's an army of money, right?
But everyone's Muslim.
Yes.
This is the whack
And it's
part.
a funny thing about it. It's like, I watch these videos, the RSF, as they're killing the army, and they say, Allahu Akbar, you know what I mean? We killed the kuffar, right? Why are they kuffar? Oh, because they're suppressing our people. And then you hear the Sudanese army fighting on this. Allahu Akbar, we kill them. Why are they killing them? Oh, because they're raping our sisters, and they're kuffar. And both sides are Muslims. Both sides, unfortunately, I guess really, there's nothing I can say. Both sides say that we are fighting on behalf of Islam.
How does Southern Sudan play into this factor? Because that's a completely different army,
Yeah.
completely different almost
So South
nation,
Sudan,
country.
South Sudan as an actual country right now, which is a really interesting thing, is struggling because it's getting an influx of people from Sudan itself actually fleeing the war itself, who are just going. So for the first time, like, South Sudan is the youngest country in the world now. It's going through a lot of problems itself. It's very, very poor, but all of a sudden now it's getting this influx of refugees who are coming in from the country that they broke off from.
Which is also ironic too, because normally, I mean, traditionally the Southerners were the ones that were kind of immigrating and going to either Egypt or so. Now the Northerners are coming to the South looking for protection.
South Sudan to get some sort of protection, right?
Wow.
I mean, it's honestly, it's really funny, and I look at it funny in a strange way.
Yeah.
But the conflict in Sudan right now, it is the largest conflict in the world. It is much larger in terms of the effect on the people. It's much larger than the one in Ukraine. It's much larger than the one in Gaza as well, for instance, right? So it was 9.7 million Sudanese people who are displaced. That's a huge number of people in a country of 45 million people. That's a really, really big number. It's almost a quarter of the country.
Like say 20-25% almost.
Yeah.
Wow.
Who are just basically don't have homes. And Sudan is not a country where, I was telling you this. People basically are always hopeful that things are going to get better within a couple of hours, because that's basically what they've been promised at the beginning of the war. They said to them, give us 2 days, you're going to go back to your homes. And people left their homes at that time in hopes that they're going to come back in a couple of days. So what they did is everybody has some sort of home in outside, like in like the villages and stuff. Everybody has a home in a village, right? So they spread out. But then now it's a year, and not only is it a war that but it's also spread out. It even reached out some of these villages. My city, for instance, I come from a place called Madani. Madani is just really, really beautiful. It's just almost the second largest city in Sudan. It's known for like culture, music, and like soccer, and like just a chilled city. Like literally, so they call it chilled city.
Right.
People are always happy, and so everybody from Khartoum tried to at least enter into Madani, and it was a safe place. It was also a part of a jazeera, and the RSF actually was also able to reach out to it very recently, and my uncle, whom I try to speak to regularly, subhanallah, his house. He was telling me there's close to 30 or 40 people living with him, because outside of Khartoum, there's no infrastructure for like hotels or rentals and stuff like that, right? So when people actually leave Khartoum to go and live in these small villages, you have to just live with people. There is not, you can go and rent a space, right? That's not how it works. People just own homes, right? Like, that's not how it works in Sudan in terms of like being able to move around and stuff like that. And just recently, for instance, they themselves were kicked out of there.
By who?
By the RSF. So RSF is the only ones who actually go on and move from city to city to city and then kick people out, right? To cause more chaos, because then when there's more chaos, they're actually very likely to win, and it shows that they're in control.
So who's in Darfur right now? Who's in the west?
So in Darfur, there's also the RSF. That's also a huge part of it. But the RSF in Darfur, for instance, they're causing even bigger damage than they're doing in Khartoum and in Madani, right? Like they're killing people in Al Junaina, in Al Fashir. These are two major cities in the western part of Sudan. And because it's so far away from Khartoum, the actual capital city, the armed forces can't really support or protect these
I was
people.
going to say, do the armed forces have troops also fighting on that
No,
front?
they are very weak in the western part, because that was literally the RSFs. They just gave it to them at the beginning. Remember this? They just gave it to them. But the RSF is now basically just causing chaos. So to them, the more chaos, the better. It just shows that they're still in control, and also it's how they're making their money. Right, so they just go and loot villages, they break them up, and they move them from place to place, right? Because it's the chaos itself is what matters to them at this point. They don't want stability in there, right?
So there's a lot of talk around the UAE and their involvement in a conflict like this.
Yeah.
I mean, correct me if I'm wrong, but there is thought or belief that, you know, the UAE specifically is, and I think you mentioned it earlier, the UAE is supporting the RSF. They're the ones kind of funneling a lot of their money to this kind of militia group. What is the general feeling around the region? Like, why are certain countries picking certain sides in the conflict? Who has a stake in what?
Yeah. So Sudan, the Sudanese war right now, it's an open secret, really, in a sense that it is a proxy war right now. It's not really a war between them, because it can actually be shut down. This war can be shut down if one of the proxies can just stop what they're providing us with. And I'll tell you like the secret behind all this. So Iran is very involved in it. Moscow is very, very involved.
Really?
Yeah, UAE is very, very involved. Saudi Arabia is very, very involved. Egypt is very, very involved. Libya, or actually the Haftar side of Libya, which is the western side of Libya, that's very, very involved. And also Ethiopia, Ahmed Abiy, for instance.
Because they're fighting over the Nile.
It's very, 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 very involved as well. No, it's also in how they're supporting who they're supporting.
Right.
And all of these people, they agree with someone and they disagree with him on something else. So you can't even say and be like, it's not like as clear as a fight as like, okay, Iran is supporting Gaza and the US is supporting Israel. It's not clear cut like that. So Russia, for instance, is really, really interested in the gold that it gets from the western part of Sudan, because that's the only way it can get money in now with all the embargoes against it. It doesn't have any other way of doing it, right?
Sure.
The UAE is also very, very important to it that the RSF wins this war, because they were the ones who were supporting them in the war in Yemen and in Saudi Arabia and so on, right? Egypt is very, very interested in the fact that the army wins, because they've had this relationship with them for such a long time, and stability, and also they don't know the RSF like that, right? Libya, the Haftar side of Libya, for instance, and this is one of the things that I was actually reading about not too long ago. One of the western part of the Libyan authority was saying this. He said, listen, if we were able to shut down the Libyan border between Sudan and Libya today, just shut it down for a week, this war would stop, because all the actual petrol, the oil, the gas that the RSF is using because it's a really primitive war. So like even if you think about it, it's not like a war with like planes and like drones and stuff. It's just like cars. You get in the car, you go and fight people and stuff. The moment we cut that oil, that gas from Libya, for instance, the RSF will surrender within a week, because they'll just run out of it, right? The moment Russia decides, Iran, for instance, is very, very also interested in the army winning as well. Yeah, because to them, the RSF fought against them in Yemen. So now they want to
payback.
So it's a mess. It's a real mess, right? Also, Saudi Arabia is on two different sides. Saudi Arabia would like for the army to actually win. But imagine, Saudi Arabia is also an ally to UAE.
Which side is the US on?
The U.S. is on the side of war all the time.
Tell me
like
about
it's all the time, right? So they always put their hands off and they say, "Oh, we don't really want to cause any problems. We want them to work it out politically, right?" So this is the same thing that also the African Union has unfortunately really been saying. They're saying we don't really want to become a part of the internal war of our members. We don't want to be a part of the internal fights. We would rather for them to settle it by themselves. The EU, for instance, would like for the army to win, but they cannot say that openly because the RSF is also protecting their borders.
Right.
They're still doing that job. They're still getting paid from them. So people have specific interests, but their interests their money is on the other person's interest. So it's like such a complex way. Like if I was actually trying to explain this to my wife at home, and I was trying to like draw lines. Okay, the red lines, that means they hate each other. The red line and the green lines means they actually mean something. But there is red lines and green lines between countries all the same way all the time, right? Like you would never think that Saudi Arabia and the UAE, for instance, are on two different sides of this because they're allies, but they are. Each one of them actually wants a different side to actually win. The UAE, for instance, has a real problem with the army because they believe the army is remnants from the Islamic government that was governing Sudan for a long time, and we know that UAE just doesn't really like any Islamic governance in Sudan. Not to say that the governance was actually Islamic, but even just the rhetoric of the word Islamic itself,
it's threatening
right?
to them.
Yeah, they don't like that.
It's also the antithesis to like a monarchy, right?
Yeah, and also it shows that revolutions work. UAE has a real problem with this. They really want to make sure that people understand the fact that revolutions don't work. You see what's happening?
And keep the people in check.
Yeah, the revolutions don't work, and not that the revolution would ever happen in the UAE because people are really comfortable. Revolutions actually happen when people are really, really uncomfortable, right? That's not going to happen in the UAE anytime. And they're that's not the way it works, right? And Saudi Arabia wants stability. Like Saudi Arabia actually just doesn't, because imagine like the Red Sea is between Sudan and Saudi Arabia. They just don't want a war happening there. So they want to be on the side of the the armed forces, because Iran also is on the side of the armed force. Like imagine it's on the side of the armed forces, and Iran has been begging Sudan to build an actual base on the Red Sea for years. This is a really important thing, that they actually have a base there for a long time, and they'll pay anything that they actually have to be able to locate there. And if they do that, it's a real threat for Saudi Arabia, because now they're being surrounded from all sides. So the geopolitics of the area itself is really problematic, right? But none of them are actually willing to actually step in and actually fix it, because it hasn't spilled yet. And that's the real thing. So right now, one of the analysts was saying, he said the only way this can happen if it just blows up and becomes something really so big to the point where refugees now go to Europe, people will just shut it down. They say, okay, fine, we can't handle all these people.
Yeah, but there's already so many, especially internal refugees, people.
Yeah, so internally they don't care.
Sure.
Right, internally nobody cares internally what happens, right? I mean, Egypt is bugging out a little bit, right? But imagine it's like the UN has paid them so much money to be able to take on now more refugees. I guess really brings us, to the next point of it, which is even those who are refugees outside of Sudan right now, they're struggling, bro. Like, this is some serious things that are actually happening abroad and stuff. I don't want to jump from one place to one place, but I guess really when we talk about like the struggles that are happening, I told you in Egypt, for instance, Sudanese people who are, which is the largest, I think it's the largest place where Sudanese people are now living in outside the war, or people who have fled right into Egypt. And Egyptians are already spread thin. Like their resources are already very, very spread thin. They hated it when the Syrians came to their country.
The Palestinians are knocking on the other door.
Yeah, they hated it when the Palestinians were always coming. And then Sudanese people have come about. And Sudanese people are different than the Syrians and the Palestinians. Syrians come and establish businesses. Palestinians come and establish business. Sudanese people don't do that. Sudanese people, we're mostly not businessmen. That's not what we do. We're mostly like employees and government, and like we're bureaucrats. That's why we do so well in like a system, when we leave us to ourselves, we just destroy it. So these people are actually depending on some of these things, and the Egyptians, again, I'm not talking very general terms here, right? Like we're not talking, so these people are not finding it very welcoming in Egypt right now as we live. Not only that, but the evil always comes out of a lot of people. There's a lot of crimes that Sudanese people are being targeted with in Egypt.
A lot of racism too.
Yeah, so this is a general theme in everything that happens to the Sudan, right? Like I always say, like the reason why you're not hearing about this war that's been happening, this is the largest war in the world right now. And you open up the New York Times today, the first page is not there, the second page is not there, the third page is not there. It doesn't get mentioned in any of the major any of the major really newspapers
Yeah.
and channels. Right? And imagine this. I'm telling you, it's the largest war in the world right now. Like Ukraine is nothing. It's not nothing, but it's relatively smaller than it. Right? Even Gaza, the war that's actually happening there, in terms of the actual like damage that it's causing to the people around it, it's less than.
It's not
that.
as many people.
Yeah, it's not as many people.
Yeah,
exactly, right? Like when you talk about 45 million people,
Yeah.
right? That's a huge number of things. But it is the far more complex one, right? Russia is very easy for people to say, hey, it's Ukraine versus Russia. Ukraine came in. Here's the narrative that the West gives us, right? Ukraine was attacked by Russia. We're on the side of Russia. Okay, and then here's the narrative between Gaza and for Israel as well. Israel is really an occupier, and we are with the oppressed.
It's very black
ones.
and white.
Yeah, Sudan, you cannot see what's actually happening. But on top of that, that tradition of us also erasing the pain of dark-skinned people, bro. That's a thing. Like I always tell people, like that's a real thing. The fact that we don't actually think that Black people, people of color, feel the same way as other people who are not.
We feel like Black people have a higher threshold for pain and nonsense. Sure. Like we can take it.
And the war is happening there. Like people, it's just a war. Like it's so. Like I gave a khutbah, for instance, not too long ago, and I mentioned the war in Sudan, and this was like at the peak also of the war that's happening in Gaza as well. And by the way, when we talk like this, we're not taking away from Gaza.
No,
right?
of course
like
not.
we're all like I feel more Ghazawi at this point than I am Sudanese, right? But I was talking about the khutbah, about what's happening in Sudan and so on, and then after the khutbah itself, our brother subhanAllah, may Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala protect him and give him Jannah. He came to me and said to me, don't you think by you mentioning the war in Sudan, you're taking away from the real cause of the things that are happening in Gaza, right? And that to me just kind of showed me
the real cause.
Yeah.
As if this is like a side tangent.
It is a side, but that's what I'm saying. To him, it's a side cause, right?
Yeah.
And then when I said to him, brother, like I have cousins the same way you have. And this was a person from Palestine. I don't know if it was from Gaza, or if it was a Palestinian guy or Shami. I don't know. But when I said to him, like I have cousins who are actually struggling. I have family members who have died as a result of this war. Like I have family members who have died as a result of this war itself. You can't say that this is not real to me. You know what I mean? But it's like, but the real fight for us as Muslims. I said to him, listen, brother, there's no real fight for us as Muslims here when my family's dying. Like the real fight for us here is to stand with justice all of the time and to always try to protect those who are in need, right? But this is a real view within our community, Boonaa. Like, within our community, Boonaa. Like
well, look, I agree, and I think that's definitely the truth. That like people have kind of compartmentalized war, and like Sudan is kind of on the far end. I think in response to that,
but again, also like not just Sudan, right? Like like let's look at DRC. The Democratic Republic of Congo.
Yeah, of course. Yeah.
Right? Like that's a real thing that's happening in the world as well. To also Muslims. If we're going to talk about Muslims, right? For instance, it's a real thing that's actually happening. But the darker you are, the less value you are.
Sure.
You hold in the world.
Or also, there's more expected. Like, oh, these are Africans. This is what they do. It's
a war. Yeah, exactly.
But so just back to this point, though, I think part of where some of the, I don't want to say ignorance, because I think people are aware there's something happening in Sudan, but the complexity of it. Yeah. It's challenging to fully comprehend because it's like we really can't pick sides, because even as you're explaining to me now, I'm thinking to my head like, which side are we, like who are we actually rooting for or not rooting for? Stuff like, who are we supporting? Who are we trying to support?
We are on the side of stopping the war, right? And it's harder to say that. Like right now, for instance, we would say if you didn't have to take a side on Gaza and Israel, and your side was just to stop the war, what would you do?
No, but there's a very clear black and white. Well, one group is being occupied.
Theoretical.
Sure.
Theoretical. Okay. If there was no sides for you to take, you just want to stop the war, what would you do?
I won't say it on camera, but
you wouldn't be able to do anything. There's nothing to do.
I mean, there's a lot to do in the sense of like rallying and
yeah, but that's what I'm saying. But you're rallying and protesting and stuff like that when you have a clear cause, like you have an
objective.
You have a demand, like right now, stop the attack on Gaza.
Sure.
That's a demand, right? But let's say, for instance, there is that objective doesn't exist.
Yeah, I see.
You wouldn't know what to say, and I always say to people, I say this to these people as well. I say to them, it's not just the complexities of the war. It's not the fact that we're black. It's also the fact that what is our demand?
The demands are not very clear.
Yeah, we've been to the parliament, for instance, right? And I met with a couple of different MPs. I don't want to mention their names because we're boycotting them.
Yeah, screw them. And they're probably not going to do anything anyways. They're not going to help. So.
And they said very clearly to me, they said to me, Sudan as a political like cause. There's nothing we have no pressure point in Canada. There's nothing. Like, what are we gonna do to them? Like in Israel, we can say to them, "We're gonna cut you off," or
Right.
"We're gonna, put a bad tweet about you." Like Israel gets bothered by that, right? Like if you actually just
PR.
oh
But you guys are,
my god,
but they're
like,
already in embargo. Like the Sudanese people have already been like,
they don't. Yeah, they
Yeah.
said to like, what is the pressure point? And that's a question that actually also like stopped me so many times when I was like, I guess I don't know, but you're the politician. I need to know what should I do, because I really don't want my family to die. And he says, and this is a guy who actually, I don't really want to
Don't say
label
his
him too
name.
much. I don't want to say his name, but he's a
Okay.
guy from a country like ours.
oh, I know who it is.
Right? He's
not,
like-
not very slick, but yeah,
Like,
point made.
I say like, you are, send us
yeah,
money.
brother. We were in the refugee camps together. Come
Yeah.
on, don't pretend like you don't know us now.
And he, but there's nothing he can do. Like, and I always, and it really saddens me. There's nothing actually you can do. But we're able to, alhamdulillah, like rally the actual Canadian government right now into being able to take in, start out what they call the family reunification program. But we still can't get the Canadian government to actually start a refugee program.
Okay, so again, but that is again dealing with the influx of refugees that are a byproduct of the war.
Yeah.
But how do we stop the war?
The war has to be stopped by basically naming out who are actually the proxies themselves, and they have to be able to stop them. That until today has not been done by any of the actual major countries in the world. If a country comes and says, "Hey, UAE, you need to stop funding this today, or you're gonna go under an embargo yourself," they'll stop it.
Yeah, but has that ever worked? Has that ever
Yeah.
it's a third party that's now
It's a really
hands off.
It's a really powerful proxy, though. It's a really powerful
It
proxy.
is, but I'm saying like, is that
Even-
enough pressure for the entire thing to cease? Is if I'm going to the source of their weapons or the source of their funding?
Yeah, the money, because there's no money being made in Sudan right now. Like the economy is just stand still. Yeah, right. Like nobody's planting. Nobody's like, there's no production. Nobody's going to work. There's nothing. There's no money in the actual.
And there's also not an
country.
ability, because I think Sudan, like many East African countries, does rely a lot on what they call remittance, like when you send money back home and stuff like that.
Yeah.
So like they're heavily dependent on people abroad sending money to Sudan.
Yeah. And now it's even more.
I
right?
could
Because now
imagine.
There's no way.
Yeah, I could imagine.
For us to do it, right? But that money itself is now just being used for eating and drinking, because food prices have skyrocketed. But we want to stop the wars. The only way to stop a war is for you to just basically choke the actual supply of the bullets.
Of which side though?
Both. You can do both, and until it shuts down, right? Like the army, for instance, has a bigger, obviously, like cache of because they have factories that they can build it, right? But if there's no one for them to fight against, the war will still stop. Right?
Okay.
Like everybody's in agreement right now that the RSF actually has to be. They're the ones who are. They need to be.
So they need to be dismantled. The RSF.
Yeah, they need to be dismantled. Everybody's in agreement with this, right? The RSF themselves say we're a part of the actual army itself. There was a law that actually brought us into it, so we cannot dismantle us. We're a part of the actual army, and they're true. That law does exist, but if you belong to the army, then you have to actually obey the major
follow
of the
the army.
Yeah, and that's basically Burhan, the guy who says to them, "No, lay down your weapons." You cannot be, you can't play on both sides. You know what I'm saying? You can't say we're independent, but yet we're a part of it. At the same time, so that's really the only way. So there is obviously clean ways. This is the thing. I hate saying this so much, bro. But the U.S. can literally stop any war it wants to right now in the moment. Any war, like even this war, by the way, in
of course,
in Ukraine and stuff,
Palestine
they actually have the ability to shut it down in a moment. They just don't have the political will. So like the ability itself, the physical ability, the money and all that stuff, like if people's lives are actually worth anything to them, they can stop any war at any given time. Any war. I'm not even talking about the Palestine. I'm talking about even the one in Ukraine and Russia. I hate quoting Donald Trump, but he said, I can shut it down in a day. And he can. The U.S. is powerful enough. It has the right amount of I guess really power and strength and stuff,
and weapons.
That they can shut it down, and enough allies that they could say to them, okay guys, this is not fun anymore, let's shut it down. And they can shut it down, right? Or just give these guys whatever, and no more people have to die. Like I always say, what is land when people's lives are being taken. You know what I mean? Like that to me is like a real thing, bro. Like people's lives, and I know people are not gonna like it when I say this. Like even when it comes to any war, it's just the land is just dirt. Like I can build my home anywhere else I want to, right? But why do I have to, why do I have to die? Why do children have to die? Why everybody? This is a real problem for me. It's a real issue for me in my mind right now. When I always talk about these things, my cousins were saying to me, "We're not leaving. This is our country." And I like, I don't know what to say. Like I don't have, and I guess it's something's wrong with me. I don't have that feeling of loyalty to any piece of land in the world where I would die for it. Is that weird? Like today, Canada goes into a war against any other country. I'm leaving, bro. I'm leaving.
I'm on the first Greyhound, brother. I'm driving on the 401.
And anyway,
call up the hockey team, brother. Let's see what they can do.
Over a war over something that I don't really believe in, like that. I'd fight. Here's the thing. I'd fight for religion.
Hell yeah.
Absolutely. That's a thing for me. But for a piece of land, for no. Especially if I can go build somewhere else, I'm comfortable.
Well, look, I mean, again, I think our context is a little bit different. We are like the children of refugees, so clearly our notion.
We already been through.
Yeah, our notion of land ownership and loyalty is kind of skewed because we haven't been given that opportunity. But I do definitely agree with the sentiment. Let's bring it back now to what we
should never ever give up on Palestine, because Palestine is an actual religious duty. So I want to be very honest, because I don't want people to actually misunderstand what I said right now. If I was Palestinian, I wouldn't leave.
Yeah. Well, that's a very different context. Yeah.
Absolutely, right? People really be
Yeah.
clear about this. Having said that, because I really don't think, I think Palestinians could do whatever they want to do. But if I was Palestinian, I wouldn't leave.
Thank you for that PSA.
I needed people to be really aware of this disclaimer.
No, you're right. It's a different, very different context. But now going back to kind of the overarching point of our discussion, which is like our viewers, the people watching, the regular Muslim, like, what can we do? We've been making dua. Even the donation, we can talk about this as well. Yeah. Even getting aid into Sudan is very challenging. And this is one thing I've even speaking to, different charity organizations. Like, there aren't enough NGOs set up on the ground there to handle that type of flow.
There is way more than enough NGOs that are set up on the ground there to handle the distribution of money that's coming in. Unfortunately, this is a discussion that I've had with a lot of the NGOs who are actually operating in this country. Some of my clients, for instance, some of the people I do work for, they always... The words are the same. Mamoun, when we set up a campaign for Sudan, we just don't get enough donations like when we set up for another country. And unfortunately, when there's not enough money coming in, there's not enough money being spent on the campaign itself.
No, but I've also heard that like getting the resources into Sudan is challenging. No. Really? Okay.
No, because in Sudan, for instance, they don't actually need you to send anything. Everything is there. They just need the money to be able to buy it and move it around, right? So it's just I send money all the time. Like I just sent money literally this morning. He just don't let the CRA see.
Don't worry, they're not watching this.
But
are they?
But I send money regularly to Sudan. That's an easy thing for us to do. I actually have relationships with Sadaqat, for instance, a very big organization that's a relief, Islamic relief in Sudan, for instance. They have their own in-house operation there.
Really?
But they don't get enough donations. Like I spoke at a webinar with Islamic relief, and they said we have work there on the ground, but I asked my cousins who are in a city that they say, and I said, we haven't really seen them. So I don't really trust, honestly, I'm not going to lie, I don't really trust major organizations like that, especially if I haven't seen them on the ground. But Sudan itself is really well known. There's an organization called, I'll give this to you guys so you can put it down, but there's an organization called like the Physicians of Sudanese.
Yeah, I was going to say Doctors of Sudan.
Sudanese American Physicians, for instance. That's a major relief organization that's been sending in millions of dollars into Sudan, and they actually know what they're doing.
Okay.
So they actually support, because that's a lot of help that's needed. There's also running hospitals.
Sure.
And not just food and eating and drinking. So again, that food is needed, drinks is all this stuff is needed. But Sudan is such a fertile country that you can kind of get by.
You just walk outside and get a guava and a mango.
You can kind of get by like that. But medicine, for instance, is a real problem. Sure. I have family members. So I'll tell you this tragic death that has happened to my wife's direct uncle, her mother's brother, who refused to leave his house because he said, "It's my house. I'm not leaving." And there was a war that was happening outside. And then the RSF came to his home, basically, and kicked him out of his house. And when they kicked him out of his house, he had nowhere else to go but the masjid. Now, he went to the masjid. He's diabetic, and he went into a diabetes coma. Now, now, I'm telling you, I'm diabetic myself. That's the easiest thing to fix. Just stuff the guy's face with sugar. Or like there's a little thing that you actually just spray, the nasal spray thing, which is available anywhere right now in Canada. You go to places, but he went to the hospital and they didn't have that. They, you know what I'm saying? Like imagine going to an actual hospital, right? And you're not able to just provide somebody with just sugar, so his sugar levels can go up, and he died.
SubhanAllah.
Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala have mercy on him.
I mean,
And make it even worse, he died in the hospital, and they couldn't leave the hospital because the war is going on outside. So they had to bury him in the actual hospital's like yard, right? And it's so sad. The doctor who was actually also working on him while this was happening, he also got shot by a stray bullet, and he was literally buried next to him. So, like tragedies are like they don't even. I would say like I tell these stories now with no longer like a shock. It's like just kind of like I'm just like it's just tragic. There's no shock. There's no like, oh my God. I was like, oh, and he died. And I hear these stories all the time, like, you know, and so these people are resilient people, subhanAllah. They just laugh it off. They're joking about it. People are dying and they're moving on and they're going to other countries. And yeah, so I would say, honestly, if you genuinely, like right now, awareness is the number one thing that I want people to actually work on. It's the fact that I need people to know about what's happening. I really need people to know what's happening. And if you know a Sudanese person, honestly, I hate saying this, he probably has a family member who's stuck. Give him some money. Do you know what I mean? Like if you know somebody, like that to me is like actually works better than these. If you don't know at all, look for the Sudanese physician. Looks for sadaqat. I'll give you guys their things. I know them really well. I know one of the people who are working for a sister who's really quite trustworthy. And they have like an office in Canada, an office also in the US, an office in the UK, and then their head office in Sudan, right? So this is the organization that I would actually suggest for to send money to in Sudan. But awareness is really where it's at this point.
Where are some places where people can pick up more resources, learn more?
Yeah, so there's social media. There's honestly so many different people.
In English, any good resource?
Yeah, in English. There's a lot of them in English. So there's so many social media accounts that you can actually follow up on that I can actually, maybe what we can do is we can actually put like a list. I'll give you guys a list before I go.
Sure, we can put it in the video description.
Yeah, inshallah ta'ala. Like just their Instagram accounts that you can actually follow. I put a lot of stuff on my Instagram as well on the conflict that's happening in Sudan. You can also follow me. I'm just kind of able to share that, just reshare that. Honestly, I know a lot of people don't really think a big deal about like social media resharing and so they actually benefit from it. But if it's a real thing, just reshare it, bro. Like just reshare things and then you know just let people know about these things that are actually happening. And not only Sudan, bro. Like Muslims are struggling all over the world, and I say Muslims because that's my major concern, but people are struggling all over the world, and you see injustice happening anywhere. We as Muslims are obligated to lift it off those who are oppressed.
Well, I mean, obviously, alhamdulillah, you've given us good insight. I technically am more confused now than I was before.
I'm sorry.
It just tells you the complexity of it, that it's not as simple and black and white as people might have assumed. So I definitely recommend people, learn more. This is, I think, for a lot of us, probably a great start to understand the kind of nuances in terms of the conflict, but also understanding what we can do to try and help. And I do hope that more aid organizations start making Sudan a priority, because I know, alhamdulillah, again, it's we want to be nuanced, we want to be fair. It's not about taking attention away from any other causes. It's not, and I don't think even Islamically you should think that way, because Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is ar-Razaq. You can give to everyone. It's not pick this or that. I think that the more you give, the more will be given to you anyways.
I'll tell you something. If another cause is more closer to you, then by all means, like donate to only that cause. But if you don't have a cause at all, I always say to you, like there's a problem in your priorities as a person. If you have to have like a cause where you're giving money to on a regular basis. Yeah,
but I also think you can give to everything, and your risk will not run out because of it.
Diversify your risk.
100%.
So I always say, like, I don't know if one of the sheikhs used to say this all the time. He says, diversify your risk, diversify your donations. Like give donations a part of it everywhere else, and then your risk itself comes in different means.
100%.
Right? Like give people locally, give to people abroad, give to people everywhere else. And the more you give, the more money gets to you.
Yeah, but I think we'll definitely plug those NGOs that you mentioned, because I think it's important to find trustworthy sources you can also give towards as well. And I think for many of us, thinking about Sudan, praying for Sudan, and hoping that one day, inshallah, it will come back to the beautiful country and nation that we know it is.
Inshallah,
that all the fighting will stop, and that we can figure out a way for everyone to exist, because I think that land it's so fruitful, and it really is the basket of like civilization, that it's a shame to see it in the state it's in now. For me as a person who's visited the country, had the pleasure of coming to it.
What did you think of it?
Oh my God, I fell in love with it, genuinely. And I think partly because I guess I can pass as Sudanese as well, so I never felt like I was out of place, and everyone just assumed I was Sudanese. So, but everything from the culture to the language, I love the, stuff. I want to say the music, but like, you know what I mean? Like the artistic side, I think Sudan has the most swag. I think out of probably most countries in the world. I love everything about it. And it's heartbreaking to see, what's happening there. And it sucks because it also feels like, we feel helpless all the time, but here I feel extremely unhelpful and unuseful, because I'm just like, I don't even know where to begin, you know? So I think it's good to have conversations with Sudanese people to understand the nuances in terms of which side is supporting which side, and, how do we properly kind of understand the conflict? But again, all of us, as an ummah, we're praying. The Prophet ﷺ taught us that if one part of the body feels pain, we all feel that pain. So all of us need to feel the pain of what's happening to our brothers and sisters, not just in Sudan, but in Gaza, in Kashmir, in anywhere Muslims are being oppressed and harmed. We ask Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala make things easy for them.
Muslims are being oppressed everywhere, subhanAllah. And if you think about like right now, everywhere in the world there are Muslims who are going through some sort of difficulties.
SubhanAllah. Sometimes we're being oppressed in our own houses. Allah. It's a note to my wife. I hope dinner's ready tonight. Astaghfirullah. Anyways, I don't want to turn this into a joking matter, because it's really not. But I am
serious business.
It is very serious, and I do really hope and pray that more people, the cause of Sudan is we're drawing more attention towards it. I hope people are able to do whatever they can to help the people of Sudan, inshallah. And we thank you for giving us your time and coming to help explain this.
Bless you. You guys, honestly, you didn't have to do this, but it's really, I appreciate you guys doing it.
No, alhamdulillah. I think it's a long overdue conversation. I think, we waited a very long time.
About a year long.
Yeah. But jazakallah khair for everybody who stayed tuned towards the end. Please continue to follow the Muslimi experience, follow Muslimi on all of our social platforms, and learn more about the great work that we're doing and how we can help support, amazing causes all around the world. Barakallah feekum for watching. Inshallah, we'll see you next time. I'm your host, Brother Boonaa Mohammed, signing off. Jazakallah khair. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.